Hello and welcome back to Elden Ring. This is, I'm going to say, part one of our second run through the Elden Ring DLC. Really, I've gone through it like 2 or 3 times because I went through it once, did that recording, went through it a second time on a second character, didn't record it, and then went through most of the areas as a cooperator, helping others on that second character. So, really, I've gone through it like 2 or 3 times already, depending on if you count co-op. And this would be like the fourth run through. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to say second. Also, yes, Ring of Mikola. So, we can... You get this as a gesture for pre-ordering the DLC, which is nice. But as you can see, this is a dexterity-based character. We have 60 points into the health stat, 30 endurance, 20 strength, and 80 intelligence, or 80 dexterity. So, I really went in on dexterity. I think this may be the only character where I've hit 80 on the main damage stat. It might be the second, but I usually keep a more even distribution of stats. Like, my main damage stat of either strength, dex, intelligence, or faith, they usually only hit like 50 to 60. Intelligence, I typically push up to like 70, 72 for the moon sorceries, but yeah, I like never hit 80 on a damage stat. And as you can see, my endurance being at 30, I usually have that at 45 or 50, so that's what took the hit this time. But I've got a Keen Grossmesser plus 25 because it looks cool and it doesn't have a sheath, which I like. And then a Keen Serpent God Curved Sword because keen for dexterity, and it also doesn't have a sheath, and it gets you a little bit of health back per kill. And then 2 Haslow's Cold Petal Whips because the dexterity scaling is still decent, but it also means that you have both frost and blood loss. And some people hate whips, but whips are actually pretty good. And the Knight's Cavalry set just look a bit different. And then Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman and Pearl Drake Talisman plus 2 to make up for some defense. Crimson Seed Talisman to heal. Taker's Cameo to mix with the Serpent God Curved Sword, just for some more passive healing. And then I've got Lightning Grease, mostly for Mimic Tier. But here we've got Lita.
Ah, were you guided here by kindly Mikola? I am Leda. And like you, I was guided by faith along his honorable path. Touch the withered arm, and you too will be transported to the realm of shadow where Mikola the Kind now dwells. My compatriots are there already. Like us, they have heard kindly Mikola's call. If you can find them, they are certain to lend you aid. Come now, touch the withered arm, and travel to the realm of shadow. I will not be far behind. May we meet again.
So I don't talk during NPC dialogue. And I typically don't talk during cutscenes. I certainly didn't in the first run. I might this time since we've already gone through the DLC. But I typically like to stay quiet just to enjoy. But here, we can start making our way around. So, since we've already gone through the DLC once, I kinda have an idea on where to go, what to do. Some details might have been lost, especially since the last time I played was, I believe, the 20th, around there, like the 20th of last month, and it is currently the 8th. So, it's been like 2 weeks, roughly. So, like I said, some details probably lost. But I have a general idea on where to go, and I remember at least most of what to do. Hello. I don't want to move forward because that'll wake those guys up. So yes, you just come to me. Yeah, like, people say that whips are bad. And then I just pull out whips. And we got the great hammer. Oh yeah, I also have a bunch of other weapons. Like Keen Mirsacord, Scorpion Stinger, Rogers, Ant Spur, Godskin Stitcher, Great Epee, Bloodhound's Fang, Nagakiba, Twin Blade, Godskin Peeler, Butchering Knife, Pike, Cross Naginata, Bolt the Grand Sax, Lance, Lucerne, Raptor Talons. So, I've got options if I need to go to something else. At the bottom, guard counters cause a burst of power. I wonder if that just means like the golden explosion. Or if it means something else. Here to Scadutree Fragments. Because as we now know, those are highly important. But yeah, the whole whips being strong thing, that's definitely not on me. Because I am not nearly good enough to use bad equipment. I can use okay equipment. I can definitely use okay equipment. But the amount of times I've heard people say that whips are, like, the worst weapon class. Trust me, if something was the worst, I would not be using it. And I don't have these as my main weapon. I don't have them as my primary damage source. But they do make for a good secondary. Or good alternative. Especially crowd control. Because Curved Sword's not that good at crowd control. They're very good at one-on-one encounters. But once you start dealing with multiple enemies, they quickly... They don't become bad. But once you run into like 2 or 3 enemies, you really need to change your play style. So that is something you'll definitely notice using curved swords. But you don't really need to do that using whips. Because if you use whips, whether you're fighting 1 opponent or 4, it's mostly the same playstyle. Because it does the same thing either way. They both have pretty good reach. Like, whether you're using the whip against 1 opponent or 3 or 4, it doesn't matter. Either way, it's going to have good reach. It's going to have a decent bit of spread. And so it can work against 1 or multiple opponents. And that's why I have them on this character. And we found this at the very end of the first run. And so we can pick that up. I don't use Spirit Ashes that much. I very, very rarely use them on the first character. Because I wanted to learn the bosses in a one-on-one setting. Though, if there was a spot, or if there was a boss where I could use, or like, summon, that's the word for it. If there was a spot where I could summon, I did that, because I wanted to see what summons were good and which ones were not. I won't be doing that this time. I'm not against summons, not against Spirit Ashes, but another Scadutree Fragment there. But in, like, whenever I do a first run, I always do as many summons as I can. Because I want to see what summons are good and which ones are not. And now that I've gotten a general idea of that from the first run, I'm not going to be using summons as much. Because I have that idea. Painting. I said it a few times in the first run, I'll say it again here. I'm not a fan of looking things up, at least until I've done like 2 to 5 runs. So, I don't know how many paintings there are for sure, but I feel like I was decently thorough. I mean, I could very much be wrong about that. Especially with how well FromSoft hides some things. But I found 3. And I feel like there might just be 3 paintings. And it took a lot of running around and a lot of trying to figure out where things were. But eventually I did find where all 3 were, so I can hopefully remember those and show them off this time. And key items. higher up. Hefty fire pot. I believe it's furnace pot. I believe it's the furnace pot that we needed to explode the things. Your hefty crackpot. I'm not a big fan of the craftables, so I probably won't use those too much. The only crafting that I really do is like fire, lightning, rot, freezing, and sometimes magic grease. But even then, that's mostly just so I can have it equipped for when I summon Mimic Tier. Which does work pretty well. Because the way Mimic Tier, like the way their stats are set up, they have more health and defense than you. They at least have one of those higher than you. Meaning that they're more defensive, but they also do less damage. And so Mimic Tier is you, but trading offense for defense. I forget how to get up there. Oh, I was here. I was gonna say, I know I got up there before. I just don't remember how. I don't think there was anything special up here. That was rude. That was rude. But as you can see, I'm taking hits. Like, I'm being hit pretty consistently by almost every enemy, but I'm still at almost full health. And this was Blade of Mercy, right? Yep. Raise the attack power after each critical hit. So if you're someone that does a lot of backstabs or parries, then that's probably good. And that would that not just be the Hornet Ring from Dark Souls? I'm assuming that's what that would be. But yeah, the whole health regen, like I'm running Serpent God Curve Sword and Taker's Cameo. But Blasphemous Blade gives you more than the Curve Sword. And there's also Blessed Dew Talisman, which I can throw on. But I wasn't up to this point. And those two definitely help. There's also Icon Shield, which also helps. And so, realistically, you can have four things. Like, you can have Blasphemous Blade in the right hand, Icon Shield in the left, Taker's Cameo, and Blessed Dew Talisman. Yeah, that right there is like half a health bar. Backhand Blade. curved blade wielded with a backhand grip, a type of weapon wielded by horn sent for generations. The style of combat associated with this weapon is marked by spinning slashes and gouging thrust attacks. Kind of surprising how early on you can get that, because in my first run, I missed it. I found it at the very, very end, but that's something you should find at the beginning, and I just completely missed it. They're not gonna catch up to us, it's fine. They're NPCs. I do wonder what Lita and Co were up to before we ran into them. Like, during the events of the base game, what were they all up to? Because a lot of them... I don't know what he was up to. But a lot of them are from base game areas. Like, Freya's a Redmane. Lita's from Mikola, so that'd be like the Erdtree. Ansbach is part of the Mogwin dynasty, so a lot of them are from base game areas. But we never got to saw it. We never see them in the base game. But you can see Lita right before heading into the DLC in the base game, so I wonder what they were up to while we were doing the events of the base game. Anyways.
Ah, Lady Leda spoke of you. You're that tarnished. Guided here by kindly Mikola. Weren't we all? I am Freya. I once fought alongside General Radahn. In battle, you can be sure I'll hold my own. Oh, another thing. Did you speak to our dour little friend? If you've yet to do so, have him give you a map of the Cross's whereabouts. You'll find more of them dotted about these lands. They are Mikola the Kind's footprints. If you've yet to do so, be sure to have our dour little friend share his map of Crosses, assuming you intend to trace kind Mikola's path.
Fie, another. Treading the heels of Mikola. Then, as that woman would surely say, we are in our purposes well aligned. But understand, your kind are not forgiven. The Erdtree is my people's enemy. By Marika long betrayed. Set aflame. I believe Mikola's apologies when he says our delivery will come, but never will I see your kind as worthy. And yet my oath I cannot overlook. If Mikola it is whom you would seek, then comrade, allow me to give you this. These are the sites of the crosses I found. I urge you, follow after Mikola. As long as you abide by his footfalls, you will be no enemy to me. I urge you, follow after Mikola. As long as you abide by his footfalls, you will be no enemy to me.
His armor set, especially the, like, cape part, looks really cool. But by the time you get it, you're in the, like, post-endgame. And so, you really don't get the chance to use it, which really sucks. But I could definitely see that being in, like, Castle Morn, like, his armor set. And I think that would be great. I've said it before. We go up or left? I think we can go up and then we can go down and back left. We can talk to these two and then I can give my thought.
You must be the Tarnished. I am Ansbach. Formerly in service to Lord Moog, but now, like you, another soul guided by kindly Mikola. I'm hardly the steady hand I once was. My fighting days are far behind me, which is why I have chosen to dedicate myself to investigation, to discern tender Mikola's ultimate purpose. I'd rather not volunteer service to a new master unless I know that I can be of use. May I request a service of you? 6 crosses, identical to this one, have been discovered in these lands. They are akin to tender Mikola's footprints, or gravestones, which mark what he's left behind. If you discover any more crosses, be certain to tell me. I presume you, too, are keen to know just what kind Mikola is doing here. If you discover any more crosses, be certain to tell me. I presume you, too, are keen to know just what kind Mikola is doing here.
Hello there. Together, we work. Together, for Mikola the Kind. Many things we have found. I like finding things. For you, Lady Leda, her allies, and the Forager brute. Things bring joy to all. I like finding things. For you, things bring joy to all. Goodbye.
Okay. So, I know that I mentioned it in the first run, but I think it warrants mentioning again. I think, in concept, Dark Souls 3 had the best idea for doing DLCs. In the sense of having one that you can access early game, and one that's meant for, like, beyond the end of the game. So that way you can have kind of an early game DLC, or early to mid game DLC, and then a late game DLC. But if you have both, and you beat the first one, then you can immediately gain access to the second one. I do think that's the best concept for DLC that they've done so far. In execution, cowardly bats refuse to fight me on my own ground. Or on the ground, rather. I won't stop me from killing him. But I think in execution, I would say that it's a very tight race between Bloodborne and Elden Ring. I think that this one, again, because you have to get to Moog, it's over here. Because you have to beat Moog, which is like an endgame boss, I still, at least in that aspect, I definitely lean towards Bloodborne, because you can access the DLC pretty early. So, in that aspect, I'm still leaning towards Bloodborne. But another thing I mentioned going through the DLC the first time was that these guys are too easy. Look at this. I get that I have 80 dexterity and these weapons are both keen, but these aren't powerful weapons. These are speedy weapons, not power weapons. And I have no Scadutree blessings. Meaning that this is like the weakest I'm going to be. But I still can kill those guys before they even get a chance to attack. So... and there... let the dogs wail on me. Let these guys hit me a few times. But, boom, still almost full health. And I'm running more of a medium armor set rather than a heavy defensive one. So... Scadutree Fragment. And again, no Scadutree blessings. So... I've said it before. I'll say it again. I think that the difficulty in the DLC is very off. Because I think the areas are too easy and the bosses are maybe just a wee bit overtuned. Although, the bosses being overtuned part, that could just be because it was my first run. And the first run is where you're going to have the least amount of knowledge. We have, yeah, I was gonna say, we do have arrows, right? Yes, we do. Good. Probably get a different bow, though. Oh yeah, now I know that those exist. Because I found them, like, halfway through the previous run. I was going to say something, but I got distracted. And it has slipped my mind. It'll probably come back to me at some point. Yeah. As I've said, areas and basic enemies, a bit too easy, whereas the bosses definitely push the difficulty a decent bit. And even like the birds and the deer and the whatnot, the local wildlife, you can kill them to get the HP slurps. These little meerkat things. I have no idea what these things actually are. But you can kill them for a slurp of HP as well. So that's why I have HP regens on so many of my builds. Because they're just so powerful. Like, you can go through so much of the game and just not heal. They don't really work against bosses. So that is the one flaw with them. I know that I said that I don't like to summon Mimic here. But this is no longer the first run. So my high reluctance to summon Mimic here was mostly about the first run. Once we got past that, I'm pretty fine summoning Mimic here. Oh, we got Blood Fiend's Arm and Blood Fiend's Fork. I believe both of these are random drops. But you can pause and read those if you want. Cool. Yeah, as you can see, they throw on lightning grease. So even though Mimic here naturally does less damage, you can throw on something like lightning grease, and Mimic here will use it. And because Mimic here has an infinite amount, like for magic builds, they have an infinite amount of FP. They have an infinite amount of consumable items. Because if you use a lightning grease, you need to worry about replenishing that. But if Mimic here uses it, who cares? They have an infinite amount. And so if you're running a melee build, and you're someone who uses Mimic here, there's absolutely no reason to not throw on a fire, lightning, or rot grease. Like, having at least one of those will be purely beneficial. The only negative part about it is that they stand still and don't contribute during the time that they're applying it. But it only takes like a second to apply. Look at that. Stunlocked and destroyed. And the dog was a decent bit of range away, but it didn't matter because whips just have such good range. So that's things. I'm not even a big fan of whips. If I were to go through every single weapon class and pick them not by strength but by how much I enjoy using them, whips probably wouldn't hit the top 10, and if they did, they would be number 10. Because there's great swords, there's curved swords, there's twin blades, there's katanas, there's straight swords, there's hammers, axes, great axes. There's a lot of weapon classes that I enjoy more than whips. But just because I don't enjoy something that much doesn't mean that it's weak, and doesn't mean that I'm going to pretend like it's weak. or attack it. And again, whips aren't the strongest, but I've heard people say that they're the weakest and that they're the worst and that they're garbage and they're horrible and they're like an D, E tier weapon class. Another painting. But they really aren't. I'd say the whips are like high C tier. Like, they're okay, they're bordering on kinda decent. They just aren't good at it took me a second to realize what that was. But yeah, the main problem, or the main two problems with whips, is that they're kind of slow, and they don't feel that good to use. Like, people are really gonna say that that is bad damage. Nah. That's good damage right there. And you could say, oh, well, Cur swords swing faster. And they can output damage faster because of that, and yeah, sure. But these have more range, they have more stun. The running one is good, the jumping attack is good. And Elden Ring has a lot of animation readers. And when you swing, a lot of enemies will automatically dodge because of the animation read. And so when you do this, you can swing 4 times and hit 0 times because the enemies will just roll all 4 attacks. But with whips, yeah, those 2 swings, they don't happen at the same time the way those do. And so it doesn't feel as good. But animation reading enemies will only dodge the first one, and they'll lose iframes before the second one hits. And that third attack comes out slow enough to where they'll dodge at the beginning, but then by the time the attack actually comes out, they've run out of iframes. And so, against animation reading enemies, you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, and hit 0 times. Whereas here, you can miss, then hit, miss, then hit, and then hit. So this, even though you swing more times, like, it's 4 swings with 2 weapons each. That's 8 potential connections. Like, 2, 4, 6, 8. But a lot of the times, you'll have 0 out of 8 connections. Whereas this, it only has 3. Like, 3 swings. But you swing both weapons, which means you have a potential of 6 connections. Here, the first one will miss, the first one will miss, and neither will miss. So for this, even though you have less swings and less potential connections, realistically you end up with more connections with 4 out of 6 because of how animation reading works in this game. And we can run past them. And then we can get the Blessed Blue Dewy Talisman. And then we can get the Oath Seeker set, along with Pata. Which, very happy to see. And that leads us back into the beginning. And so, yeah, the main reason I use whips on this character is partially because it's a change of pace, because I almost never use whips, but partially just to show that they're actually pretty good. They're at least viable for most things. Are they the best weapon class? Absolutely not. Are they my favorite weapon class? Absolutely not. But they can pull their weight. And that's more than some other weapon classes. And so that's why I'm using them on this character. Is just to show that, hey, these things are actually kind of good. And if someone is hating on whips, that can mean a few things. One, it could mean that they're looking at whips from like a min-max perspective, which from a min-max perspective, from a get every single possible ounce of goodness that you possibly could. If you want like the most efficient, the best at everything, they're not the weapon class. Hefty Furnace Pot, that's what we want. But yeah, there are objectively better weapon classes. Most of the weapon classes are objectively better. But that's not how I approach weapons. I approach weapons mostly from the perspective of, are they fun and are they good enough? Because if I'm given the choice between two weapons, where one is extremely powerful but I don't enjoy using it, or a second weapon where I enjoy using it but it's just okay, most of the time I'll use the okay weapon. I'll only use the extremely powerful weapon if my knowledge and skill isn't good enough to get me through an area or past a boss. Which, for the most part, I can get through areas and bosses. Not always, but usually. There are some things, like, I'm not gonna use whips against Promised Consort Radon. Whips are good, but they're not that good. So, there are limitations. But yeah, people who hate on whips can be coming from that perspective, which I understand but disagree with. They can also be taking things... These things are so gross. But they can be taking things from a fun perspective, and they just don't enjoy whips, which is understandable and valid, but again, that's not a reason to say that they're objectively bad. You can say something isn't fun, you can say that you don't enjoy something. But just because you don't enjoy something doesn't mean it's bad. And just because something doesn't fit your personal taste doesn't mean that it's bad. Like I said, whips aren't my personal favorites. They aren't even a top 10, or if they are, it is very shaky. But they are objectively somewhat decent. I think it's down here. Tis not. Would it be up here then? I thought it was somewhere around here, one of the painting rewards. I thought it was around here. Kinda not seeming like it though. Yeah, just because they aren't my personal favorites doesn't mean that I think it's okay to call them bad. They can also be coming from the perspective of looking at things from a versatility standpoint, which I definitely understand, considering greatswords are my personal favorite, and what I think is the best weapon class. Well, I don't know about personal favorite, but I do think they're the best weapon class. And a large part of that is their versatility. And so I can definitely understand that. But again, that's not enough to say that they're the worst, because whips do have a decent bit of versatility. They're not the most versatile, but they can be used in a decent amount of situations against a decent amount of enemies. And like I said, even though they're not the best, they still have a bit of versatility, even if it's not the most amount. But people who hate on whips could also be coming from the perspective of simply not understanding whips and what makes them good. And in this, I've kind of shown a little bit what they're good at, or one of the situations that they're good at. And I also showed them being pretty good in the preparing for the Shadow of the Erdtree run. In the very final part, hefty flypot. In the very final part, I showed off some different build options that I was going into the DLC with. And see? I'm not even trying. Not even trying, and whips are doing good. I would have had a significantly harder time with these things because the dogs could just dodge and I could only hit one instead of two. And again, I really was not trying there. I spent more time looking at the timer, because I have a timer to make sure I don't go over an hour. Yeah. Like, I use them for Anastasia in the one section, the consecrated snowfield. Sir, I know that you're alive. Ah, they were just waiting for me to pick it up, and then they all jumped down. Okay. I see what they were getting at. But yeah, Anastasia, the Tarnished Eater, invades you in the consecrated snowfield. And I thoroughly destroyed her with whips there to show that, hey, whips are actually good. And so, like I said, they're not the most versatile or the fastest or the best at min-maxing, but they still have a decent bit of versatility to them. And they're pretty powerful, and they actually fill a niche that most weapons don't. In just completely shutting down animation readers. Here it is. Nice. But yeah, that's a niche that not a lot of weapons can do. And not only is it something that not a lot of weapons can do, whips do them the best by quite a long shot. So, like I said, whips, not the best, but they are good. And so, I think people hate on them a bit too much. But then they can also come from the perspective of just being a contrarian. Just saying that something that is good. Well, no. Actually, if you really think about it, it's actually bad. Which I have seen a decent bit of. Like, I've seen people say that great swords are bad, which is absolutely ludicrous. Because once again, they are the best weapon class in the Soul series. And you could arguably say that it's something else, but I mean, really, again, just the way I see it, there isn't really any competition. They're just too versatile. But with that being said, I think we can end it here. So, we started out at the very beginning. We got the Black Steel Great Hammer. We got the Sacred Tower painting. The Greater Potentate's Cookbook 1, a hefty cracked pot, Blade of Mercy, Backhand Blade, Cross Map, a note for Sealed Spirit Springs. We got 6 Scadutree Fragments. We got String Sellers, Bell Bearing. We got 2 weapons. We got the Outer God Heirloom, the Incursion Painting, Blessed Blue Talisman, the Oathseeker Set, Pata, Greater Potentate's Cookbook 2, 3 Revered Spirit Ash, 3 Revered Spirit Ashes, the Ailment Talisman, Greater Potentate's Cookbook 10, Grey Bird Armor, and the Serpent Crush Shield. So, yeah.